Welcome to Global Media Network, LLC. Passionate World Talk Radio is a wholly owned subsidiary of GMN LLC. Our motto is educate, enlighten, entertain. And if you wish to join us in our panel discussion, you may come in from Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn and write it in. Or if you like, let me know if you want to be invited. I will send you the email code and you can come in, state a name, give your opinion, advice, or ask a question, and we will try to answer it. This is the second episode of Lest We Forget with hosts Lisa Skinner, Betsy Wurzel, and Lillian Cauldwell. So the first is, Lisa Skinner, who will give her material. Welcome, Lisa.
Oh, thanks, Lillian, for that wonderful introduction. Hello, friends. Thank you so much for being here at the second episode of our Human Atrocity series. And this is actually the second of our series of talking about America and the Holocaust. I mentioned last week in our first episode how all of the circumstances created a perfect storm of circumstances that led up to 6 million people being annihilated in Europe by the Nazis. And as we told you last week, we're going to do a deeper dive into how this occurred. Anti-Semitism, xenophobia, the Great Depression, and bureaucratic indifferences all tempered America's willingness to provide a safe haven for hundreds of thousands of desperate Jews. So as we know, and Lillian shared with you in her extensive timeline last week, that anti-Semitism really is not a new ideology. It has been around since the beginning of mankind. We trace it back prior to the Middle Ages, as Lillian pointed out, and we see it continuing today. And here in the United States, it appears that it's even becoming more extreme. So let's take another look back at the Holocaust and really examine what that perfect storm of circumstances were that led up to the annihilation of 6 million people during World War II. Some of the things that I discovered are as follows. For centuries, America's door had been wide open to immigrants coming to America in search of a better quality of life. Before the Civil War, they mostly immigrated from Northern Europe. In 1882, responding to pressure from unions, the United States passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. This treaty with the Chinese government banned Chinese immigrants from entering America and called for the deportation of any who arrived after 1880. Now, keep in mind, many Chinese immigrants came to the United States during the Golden Door period, and they were instrumental in building our railroads. And then all of a sudden, the United States decided they don't want Chinese people in the U.S. anymore. So they not only deported the ones who were here, but they also enacted this Chinese exclusion law to keep any of them from entering the U.S. And that was again in 1882. It was actually the first significant law restricting immigration in the U.S. And between 1870 and 1914, 19 million people arrived in the U.S. By 1910, New York was home to more than 1 million Jews, which was more than 1/4 of New York's population. So by the time Hitler became the chancellor of Germany in 1933, we already had an influx of the Jewish population who had come to create new and higher quality lives for themselves in the US. So to give you an example of what the immigration laws did to prevent Jews from retreating here to the US after Hitler came to power, is 2,000 Jews only escaped anti-Semitic practices in Germany. And as I mentioned last week, 2 out of 3 Jews living in Germany, Poland, and the rest of Europe, 2 out of 3 were murdered. Why didn't they just flee Germany? Well, they did. So when Hitler came into power, they fled to 5 different countries: the Netherlands, Belgium, Northern France, and several others, to safety. And for a time, they were safe. And they went on with their lives, the lives that they had cherished in Germany before Hitler came into power. What happened was, and this is part of the perfect storm of circumstances that we are really exemplifying here, Hitler invaded every single country that they fled to, and they were trapped. And they had no idea that the countries that they had fled to from their home country of Germany was going to be invaded by Hitler and his Nazi army. So they went there, they were accepted there, and then they invaded, and they were in the same situation that they had found themselves in Germany. But this time they were trapped. They were trying to flee to countries that would accept them, the United States being one of them. And unfortunately, part of this perfect storm of circumstances that was occurring during this time period was the Great Depression in the United States. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who actually was very supportive of the plight that the Jews were facing in Europe, wanted to allow them to come into the US, but he was very, very sensitive and supportive of the court of public opinion. So he sent out many, many surveys. And because it was right in the throes of the Great Depression, the people living here in the United States were adamant not to let more immigrants come into the country because very few people had food and very few people had jobs. And they felt very strongly that if FDR and Congress allowed these Jews from Europe who were being subjected to the cruelties of Nazi and his armies, they would take the food that the very little food that was available for the existing U.S. citizens and their jobs. So in support of the court of public opinion, FDR felt that it would be a real blow on him as president of the United States if he lifted or even eased the immigration laws and allowed the refugees to come into the United States. At one time, a shipload of Jewish refugees loaded a ship, and the country of Cuba said, yes, you can come here. We will take you in. We will protect you. So thousands of Jews got on this ship and sailed to Cuba. And when they got there, the Cuban government changed their mind and would not allow them to come aboard, to get off the ship and come live with them. They literally had to turn around and go somewhere else. So as we're seeing here, the Jewish population, and there were about 9 million of them throughout Europe during this period of time, are trying to flee for their safety, and everywhere they turned, because of circumstances of history, of the history occurring in other countries, the Great Depression in the US, a lot of them ended up being trapped in Europe. And this is what led to the annihilation of more than 6 million people. Some of them did successfully come here, but like I said, very, very few in comparison to how many ended up dying. And then there's other circumstances that happened also. Theodore Roosevelt was a big believer in eugenics. What are eugenics? Eugenics is a set of beliefs and practices that aim to improve the genetic quality of a human population. Those who were seen as unfit for society, who were mentally ill, and specific communities of color were targeted. American eugenicists tended to believe in the genetic superiority of Nordic, Germanic, and Anglo-Saxon peoples. So what did they do? They started sterilizing people here in the US of the poor, the disabled, and the people they considered to be immoral was carried out right here on our own homeland. The American eugenics movement received extensive funding from various corporations and foundations, including the Andrew Carnegie Institution, the Rockefeller Foundation, as well as the Harriman Railroad Fortune. In 1906, J.H. Kellogg provided funding to help fund the Race Betterment Foundation, which was in Battle Creek, Michigan, and the Nazis adopted the practice of eugenics inspired by the U.S. against the Jews. They copied our ideology about eugenics to eliminate the Jewish population. A lot of people aren't aware of this. So this was a symphony of circumstances that continued to happen throughout the U.S. And Europe simultaneously that led to the annihilation of 6 million people during World War II. I'm going to turn the floor over to Betsy and to Lillian to further open the discussion about the facts that I've just stated, that I have researched extensively on how this could have happened in the 20th century. And it did happen, and lest we forget that it did happen, and all of the circumstances that contributed to this horrific act of annihilating 6 million people during World War II came about. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Now, friends and listeners, Betsy and I are going to talk about this, and of course, Lisa will also join us, and we hope you join us too. But before we do that, I want everybody to take a good look around and think about what's happening in the United States since the pandemic. Inflation. Money is not the value of what it was before the pandemic. My mother went back to Germany with her father and mother and sister right before the war started, because her mother was Austrian, her father was German, and her father was gone back to Germany to visit relatives. And the story she told me was he took a wheelbarrow and filled it with German notes, and out of all those money stacked into the wheelbarrow, he was only could afford a loaf of bread. Is it possible that can happen in the United States? Oh, yeah. Right now, you go to the grocery store and one bag, and you don't even include red meat, folks, you're already paying well over $100. when I went grocery shopping, and of course I do it about once a month, I was appalled with the fewness of the bags, but the highness of the bill. I spent $300 and I didn't buy luxury items. Luxury items, soda, red meat, corn chips, pretzels, none of that stuff. I just bought stuff that was healthy. Please don't groan, but some of us do eat healthy food. And even that, I wasn't buying organic or labels. I went to a discount grocery store, but I still walked out with a bill of over $300. There are places in the grocery store where the shelves are always bare. I know you've seen them. Paper towels, toilet paper, baby items. I have to admit, I haven't seen any bare shelves for soda yet. Probably that would be a no-no along with alcohol. But the fact of the matter is, the primary foods one needs to eat, and if you have 4 or 5 kids and they're teenagers, my heart goes out to you because I don't know how you're doing it. Even if you're a vegetarian, the price of the alternative foods you would need to substitute has gone up. For example, eggs. Of course, we have bird flu in the United States. So anybody can tell you if we have bird flu, chickens are birds, chickens won't lay eggs. However, lucky for you, if you want to learn how to cook or bake without eggs, let me know. I can tell you how to do that because I searched for it. Because eggs are one of those primary ingredients that everybody finds, whether you're cooking or baking. Immigration. What are we doing with immigration? We're going to build a wall? Really? I live down in Houston, Texas. They'll tunnel under it, and they already have, with elaborate tunnels. Or they'll climb over it, or they'll fly over it. The Berlin Wall really didn't work all that well between East and West Germany. Folks, take a look at your past history. It is repeating itself all over again. Betsy?
Hi, thank you. Thanks for your research, Lisa. It was very interesting. And thanks, Lillian. What I have to say is that when I watched videos about the Holocaust on YouTube, I was shocked. And I tell you, shocked right to the core to know that the company DuPont was involved in experiments. And they did experiments in the concentration camps on Jews, mostly, because that's mostly that was there, sterilization, nuclear medicine, subjecting people to see how they reacted to cold and hot. Dr. Mengele loved twins, and he wanted a superior race. Hitler wanted that also. And he would experiment with twins, removing their eyes, removing the male's genitals. So disgusting. Who knows what these poor people were subjected to? They were tortured. And of course, if they survived, how many of those people had cancer and passed it on to their children? It's really scary when you think about it. What happened then can very easily happen now. They were having test tube babies, right? People, sterilization, even in America. Yes, they did sterilize people that were disabled. And what about how they experimented with people who were in institutions, group homes? They would experiment with them. The poor men, if I can pronounce this right, Tuscany servicemen were experimented on about VD. They weren't given the treatment, or if they were given something, it didn't help, it made them worse. This is America, folks. This is terrible. You know, America has its faults. I love America. I wouldn't live anywhere else, maybe Israel, if I had a choice. But there's a lot of things that went on. But I do want to give a couple of references, if I might. If you are Jewish or you have Jewish ancestors, maybe grandfather or grandmother, you had their last name, and you want to trace your genealogy to find out where in Europe or wherever else your family came from, check out the Jewish Genealogy portal on Facebook. Excellent information there you could get. Also, can't read my handwriting with my glasses on. Tracing the tribe, Jewish genealogy on Facebook. The links will be in the blog. Also, if you're Jewish or not, I highly recommend the Arizona Judaic Studies or Arizona Jewish Studies from Arizona University. I attended these free seminars online, and there's also seminars that you can pay for, courses that you could take. Excellent. I learned a lot from them, and I highly recommend that. You don't have to be Jewish. You might want to learn about Jewish history, but they really go deep, talking about ancestry and also history of the Jews. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
People need to realize that the atrocities that were done during World War II has been an accepted part of human behavior from the beginning of time. Way before medieval Europe, the Jews had to wear white badges on their chests. That's where Hitler got his yellow star, where they had to wear them. In the United States, it was said before the Civil War and even after the Civil War that it didn't matter if you were born white or not, if you had a trace of black blood in you, you were not white, you were black. And therefore, you had to live an African American life. You were already branded. And they did the same thing during the Inquisition, where a lot of the Jews had converted to Christianity, but it didn't save them. They were burned or brutalized because they had the original Jewish blood. I'm not quite sure how they determined that, but in the Inquisition's eyes, you were still Jewish. I mean, Spain and Portugal, especially Spain was famous for the Inquisition trials. They bragged about them. Or what about the Crusades when they went to Jerusalem to take it back from the infidels? I'm pretty sure if you speak to the infidels' descendants, they have a few things to say about the Christians who tried to take their land away from them for empire building. Everything is relative. Look what we do in the 21st century. By the 21st century, you think we've had it, that we figured out how to at least coexist peacefully? No. We separate families from their children. And the result, there's a lot of those kids have never been reunited with their families. Is that just as worse as containing refugees from concentration camps that are put in another type of camp right after World War II by the U.S. because their home has been denied to them and they have no place to go? So they're put in another type of concentration camp after the war? The U.S. did that? Does that make sense? Lisa?
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple things to some of the comments that you shared with the audience and you too, Betsy. Kind of piggybacking on your your awareness of inflation today, I wanted to make mention because it is history repeating itself again. But here's an example of that very same situation. So even as far back as the Civil War, which is a good example, the Civil War was between 1861 and 1865. The South really did not have a lot of resources available to them. And by the middle of the war, they, with all of the resources that had been used up that they could not get access to, check this out. A barrel of flour cost $200 in the midst of the Civil War in the South, because they had no access. Now, $200 in 1863 might as well have been $2 million, because in today's times, $200 for a barrel of flour would seem pretty excessive. But in 1863, a barrel of flour, if they could find one, cost $200. So who could buy a barrel of flour? The wealthy? Yeah. And a couple other things that happened prior to World War II. We talked about eugenics. Basically, the ideology that was created through the practice of eugenics, that, again, Theodore Roosevelt was a big supporter of, is that bad people need to stop reproducing. Only good people should be allowed to reproduce. And again, Hitler adapted that ideology and put it into play. He originally got his idea about putting the Jews on reservations when he was serving a prison sentence for trying to overthrow the German government after World War I. And he thought that was such a brilliant idea. So initially, he started putting German Jews onto reservations like we did with the Native Americans in the US. And for some reason, it didn't work. It was unsuccessful in his mind that the Jews could successfully live apart from the Aryan race on reservation type arrangements. And that's when he decided that the new order needed to be murder. And that's kind of how that escalated into that. He originally tried putting them on reservations, and he got the idea from the US. One of the other ideologies that I uncovered about the US during the period of time where they were not allowing Jews into the US is this court of public opinion felt, if we let them in, they will destroy the American gene pool in America. And that's what they came to believe. And, it was really a shame, because with the practice of eugenics, the view that Jews were a separate breed of people, the view that nationalities were synonymous with various breeds of people, like we see with our dogs. There's a variety of different breeds of dogs, and that's how we basically decide which one we want for our pet. Jewish people were looked at as a completely different breed than the Aryan race. So that contributed to everything we're talking about. Then Henry Ford, yes, the gentleman that manufactured the Ford cars, he blamed the Jews for everything. And he had the resources available to him to create a newspaper that published anti-Semitic articles. And he convinced Americans that Jews were part of a conspiracy that would take over the world, and that all they cared about was having as much money as they could possibly collect. Henry Ford spread that. belief into the American people through his newspaper articles, which he owned. So he had control over that. Another thing that happened in the 1920s, immigration to the US was restricted by President Calvin Coolidge. Let's keep Americans American, he said. He created and wrote on May 26, 1924, the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act. That act barred all Asians, not just the Chinese that were barred in 1882. So these are more examples of circumstances that led up to the Holocaust. And a lot of people even question whether the Holocaust ever even existed. I think that history has demonstrated that, oh yeah, there was a Holocaust. In 1921, 805,000 Jews were allowed into the US. But in 1925, because of the Immigration Act that Calvin Coolidge signed into law, less than 150, I'm sorry, not Jews, 805,000 people, immigrants. In 1925, that number was reduced to 150,000 people only. In 1924, Hitler learned of the new American immigration law and felt confident that the Jews in Europe were going to have no place to go. And he was right.
Does anybody have anything to add? Or we'll continue this discussion next week about the U.S. and the Holocaust. Make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, the Holocaust can happen again. And it doesn't just have to be the Jews this time. The people who are in charge of our country have a long list of people they would like to get rid of. Certainly, they've never done anything about the homeless, and I'm sure they would love to. They have a lot of the indigent, people who are drunks or drug addicts as well, who live on the street, plus plenty of families where mothers have not been properly prepared to go into a workforce because the skills level have changed so dramatically in the last 5 years. That is no longer the industrial revolution. It's the digital/technological. And if you have not been trained to use the computer in one manner or another, or know how to use basic software, WordPress, Excel, Google, you're in for a long, hard job search. When immigrants first started coming into our country from South America, Central America, and from Mexico, these were the jobs that they were going after. The farmers no longer could hire men or women who would go into the fields and pick the crops. So the folks from Mexico, Central and South America came up and they were used to pick the crops. Unfortunately for the farmers, they unionize under one man. Sorry, I forgot his name, but it took him a long time before he could really get his people together so that they wouldn't eke out a living on the fields. They were treated the same way that the plantation owners treated the African Americans and the Chinese and anybody else that they could get their hands on to do the dirty work because, quote, whites, unquote, do not use their hands in the dirt. Hasn't changed. People wonder why there are so many African Americans and Hispanics in our health field working as caregivers or being there to be companions to the older generation, because a lot of people in our society look down upon those jobs and they're be too good to work them. One of the problems our country has gotten very elite. For a country that started out for democracy for all, we're just as bad as India or England or any of the European nations that have class structures. And a lot of kids who are being born, as they say, on the wrong side of the blanket never get out of that cycle because nothing is ever really provided to them to help them get out of that cycle.
I see that here in my own backyard. I live in wine country in Napa Valley. There are over 500 wineries here. Most of you heard of Napa. Who are the workers that are in the fields, picking the wines, the grapes? They're the entire Hispanic community. I don't think I've ever seen anybody other than Hispanics working out there in the vineyards. Just, blood, sweat, and tears, getting those grapes prepared for the harvest, for the winemaking. And this cycle continues and continues and continues. So I just wanted to give an example of what I see in my own backyard every single day of my life that Lillian is referring to. It's very, very true. And same ethnicities are our caregivers, and a lot of the kind of in the weeds type jobs that are available for people out there. It's a very dominant situation and doesn't change.
And it doesn't change. And the ironic thing is, during the 20th century, during the 70s, 80s, and 90s, rich kids would go down to Cuba to pick sugar cane because they thought that was pretty awesome. Wake up, people. It's not awesome. There are people there. That's all they can afford to do. Why are we down there in the first place? Like I told my kid, you're smart. Don't take a job at McDonald's or Burger King, because there are people out there that have nothing else that they can do except a job at Burger King or at McDonald's. So you're taking the food out of their kids' mouths because they haven't been trained. They haven't been educated. So there's no way for them really to get out of that cycle in which we have put them in. But you're a bright kid. You can do better. And while you're doing better, you can turn around and help those behind you.
Well, California's even gone to the extent, I've noticed now that some of these fast food chains are attracting helpers by paying them like $23 an hour now. I don't know if that's happening in other states, but it's happening in Northern California. And that's a pretty good wage for a
very good wage.
I mean, minimum wage is what, $15 an hour now?
Yes.
So, but the problem is that is considered a decent paying job, but the problem is you get stuck in it.
Yes. And you don't have any opportunities to advance. There's no additional training. That glass ceiling that women have been pounding against for the last 180 years, the same thing applies to the minorities. And you don't have to be Black, you don't have to be Jewish, you don't have to be an immigrant. But if the great white father is in control, we're still going to be pounding on that ceiling to go past it, because what they use to determine how they keep you down is the most holy relic of them all. And it hasn't changed, has it, ladies?
Well, I see one of the common comments that we all hear. It's all over the news. It's all over the internet. It's what's trending is the great divide between the classes. So what is the saying? The rich get richer and the poor get
richer. But Pearl S. Buck says it.
Yeah.
You ever read her books? She was from China, missionary parents. When the poor get too poor and the rich get too rich, revolution.
And we are witnessing today in the world the extreme polarization of this divide. I think this is probably one of the worst periods we've ever seen this happen, at least in the US. Like I said, it's trending everywhere, and it's absolutely true. And like, you know, the other two hosts have said, you go to the grocery store and you can't afford to buy healthy food for your children because it's just too darned expensive. I think it's shameful, the cost of living that I see today. And I don't even like to go to the grocery store anymore because I can't stand what the prices are. It makes me cringe that I have to spend the kind of money that I'm spending to eat.
Yeah, I have to comment on that. I went shopping. I go every week. A bag of potatoes, not even like name brand, the store brand, 5-pound bag was $4.49. I couldn't believe it. And I feel like the prices went up on everything. The quality went down. It's not the quality there. The food doesn't taste the same. It's just Josh and I spend over $100 every week, and there's not much there. It's disgusting.
It really
And
is.
have you noticed that the containers are getting smaller?
Yes.
Yes. I thought I was going crazy.
Remember a gallon of ice cream? Now you get a
yeah,
three scoopfuls and a straw.
Yes, packages are getting smaller, definitely. I don't really drink soda. Josh does, and I was like $9.99 for a 12-pack. Are they nuts?
Well, if you're buying Coke or Pepsi, you're paying for the brand name. You're not paying for what's swooshing around inside of that. So I try not to buy brands because it's the same thing, ladies and gentlemen, except the guys who own these brands haven't gotten their paws, what they call the middleman.
Have you noticed the price of dairy products? Eggs,
Yes.
milk, half and half,
Yeah.
cheese. I bought a couple of bags of cheese the other day to make a couple meals at home using cheese. And I probably spent close to $40 on four different varieties of cheese to go with these meals that I was cooking. I couldn't believe it. And one of them, a bag of mozzarella cheese, shredded mozzarella cheese, I paid $10 for, and that was on sale.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, have you taken a look at the whipped cream cans? They started off at $1.23. And you thought, oh my God, that's a lot of money. Now they're up to $5.
I was going to say $5. Yeah.
So if you don't think it can happen here, I'm telling you right now, you're wrong. And if you don't think a madman like Hitler can't work their way up through our system, you're wrong. And if you need another example, take a look at Rome. Rome started off as a republic, but it didn't last very long. It went into emperors immediately. I know this is hard stuff, and you really don't want to listen to this stuff because it gives you a bad stomach or your eyes start twitching. But when people talk about leaving the future to the kids that are coming up now, I have 3 grandchildren. One's at 9, the other 2 are 16. So the 9-year-old is going to inherit a worse world than his 2 older sisters at 16. Think about it. What do you want? Do you want the atrocities of history that we're going to continue to discuss to keep on repeating itself? Or are you going to say, like Clint Eastwood, no, I'm not going to take it anymore?
It scares me for my grandchildren too. It really does. I think about it every single day, and it makes me glad that I'm the generation I am, because I don't see any easy solutions for the generations coming up behind me unless, you know, we all work together and smooth the situation out. But I think we all agree, and you probably do too, that just in the last 5-10 years, life's getting harder.
Yes.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And the
Yes.
middle
Too
class
noisy. It's
will later
too
disappear altogether.
divisive. It's too noisy. I don't know. A lot of people are suffering some very severe psychological problems, especially our teenagers. They
Mhm.
feel so lost. Anyway, off my soapbox for the.
That's okay. Just remember when Roosevelt said, a chicken in every pot, there's no guarantee that that chicken will be in stock when you go and buy it. Or if it's there, it might be more than $5 a pound. So please think about what we're saying. You can contact all of us or one of us. You can reach me at pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com. Lisa?
You can send me an email, and my email address is dementiawhisperer1@gmail.com. That's not one spelled out ONE. It's the number one. dementiawhisperer1@gmail.com. And I would love to hear from you. I really would. And then we will give a shout out to all of you who email us and we'll open up for discussion, your feedback and your comments on our show next week.
Absolutely. Betsy?
Yes, you could send me an email at Sloan, that's my married name, SLOAN, Betsy, BETSY 31@gmail.com. And you could also reach me through my Facebook page, a messenger, Betsy Wurzel. And I'd like to hear from you. Share your opinions. Let us know what you think. Thank you.
We also have a Facebook page, Lest We Forget. So it's facebook.com/Lest We Forget. Please leave your comments. Tell us how you feel, or even suggest a topic that you would like to see addressed, but you haven't seen it for whatever the reasons. Now, both Betsy and Lisa have resources they wish to share with you.
I've been researching my information in several different places. The PBS documentary that it has recently come out, it is A History to be Reckoned With, the U.S. and the Holocaust, by Ken Burns, Lynn Novick, and Sarah Botstein. I also found just a couple of remarkable books on the subject, which I've been referring to. The first book is called The Jews Should Keep Quiet. And the author is Raphael Medoff, Medoff. And then the third resource is a book called Americans and the Holocaust by Daniel Green and Edward Phillips, as well as several historical articles or articles on the Holocaust and World War II that I found on the internet. And the thing that's really interesting that I mentioned last week, all of these resources that I've been gathering my information from, they're all saying the same thing. They're consistent with one another, and I think that's really profound and very important.
Absolutely. And Betsy, could you please cite the resources that you went to find out more about your roots?
Yes. I also have my family history from word of mouth, but tracing I take my glasses off, Tracing the Tribe, Jewish Genealogy on Facebook, and the, where was the other one? Oh, Jewish Genealogy portal on Facebook. I forgot which one of those I gave, because I don't know my father's family's history as well as my mom's. And I told them the names of my grandparents and great-grandfather. They showed me a manifest. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe the information that they made available to me, and for free.
That's a great resource to
have it's a great group. And then you could see other people's histories they're asking about. their history or what something is in Hebrew or in Yiddish. It's great. And also, I highly recommend the Arizona Judaic Studies or Arizona Jewish Studies, and the link will be in the blog, because you don't have to be Jewish. It's great to know history, and I love attending their seminars. I attend the free ones, but there are ones that you can pay for. I guess they go more in depth, and also you could take courses online. So that's a great.
It's really good to know, because I was told that I don't have any ancestors left. So I'd be interested to see if they can find anything. And as my friend Janice Smith once told me, I can trace my ancestry back to Adam and Eve. And that's a wonderful thing, but not if you have a Holocaust coming in and interrupting the flow of living.
All mine have disappeared off the face of the earth. I don't even know names.
Exactly. So me, Lisa, and Betsy want to thank you for joining us today. Mm-hmm. You will be able to see the blog on https://passionateworldtalkradio.com/blogs. You will also hear it on YouTube and on Spreaker and on Twitter and on Facebook.com/Passionate World Radio. Also on our new page, Facebook.com/Lest We Forget, and there's hyphens between lest and we and forget, so you won't have any problem.
One thing real quick, it's lest, L-E-S-T.
Yes,
that sounds like
I've got to put the T sound in. Yeah. I've gotten lazy, ladies and gentlemen. My apologies. Lest we forget not to repeat the historical atrocities that have plagued mankind, and provide a call to action to try to keep it from repeating itself. So we want to thank everybody for joining us today. There will be a third episode next week. Date and time will be provided and proclaimed in Facebook. And remember, you too can do something about this and prevent atrocities in history.